Well, um, the object at hand is the last chapter of Ray Brassier's Nihil Unbound, The Truth of Extinction. It's a very dense text, which the point is to underline a deep positivity behind the idea of nihilism, which may appear at first somewhat paradoxical. After all, nothing is zero and the positive is one. As dense as it is, there are a few knots I believe I could try to untie. I could explain what this idea, positive nothing, means on its own terms, an expanded yet exegetic read of the text, and I could else explain my understanding of it, giving myself space to speculate on what's going on in the blank space of the text. That would allow me to point how Nietzsche is just sophisticating Spinozism, and how this optimism I'm seeing throughout Brassier's read of Nietzsche is just a post-thermodynamical expression of Spinoza's mechanism of deletion of guilt. The body knows nothing of the mind, and the mind knows nothing of the body. They don't communicate, as Descartes stupidly defends. How could mind and body communicate? Show me, asks Spinoza, literally. Show me where it is that there is a piece of mind so big and a piece of body so small that they are able to communicate. When you think, I'm gonna move my hand, and you move your hand, this is a coincidence. And this coincidence is a sign that you are healthily minded. For if you thought of moving your hand and it didn't move, or else it moved without you thinking of it, you'd be considered mentally insane and possibly committed to a mental institution. The optimal efficiency of mind-body coincidence rate is what is considered to be the sign of normality. The bigger the frequency of the coincidence, the more someone is considered normal. This, most people, either consciously or not, understand. It is the following implication that which is harder to grasp, and that which puts Spinoza's life in danger. How can mind and body not be in communication when I so clearly command my body with my mind? Even if that were true, that they don't communicate, how and why would this coincidence, mind thinks, body does, happen? Well, they don't communicate, says Spinoza, because they are the same thing. They're two varied expressions of exactly the same thing. The body is the idea of the mind, and the mind is the idea of the body. Think about it for a second, or a minute, or an hour. The body is the idea of the mind. It is not your mind. It is that which you consider it to be. That's what it really is. Just as the mind is the idea of the body. It's not that your mind is your body, but what you think is your body, that is your mind, and vice versa. Wait a minute. Is Spinoza saying that your thoughts are located in specific parts of your body? He's not. But maybe someone's gonna say it. The point is, lack of body control is universally acclaimed as evidence of insanity. Be that insanity negative, for some people lock their lunatics, be that insanity positive, for some people follow these individuals as shaman figures. They're either way rendered inept for overall societal life. What is a mostly ignored consequence of this? For the importance of body-mind coincidence dimension were true and were considering to be, it would obviously not only in the critical cases that this would be of relevance. Is if the body and the mind are not really in communication, nothing is really anyone's fault. This is the whole point of the God of Spinoza Whatever it is, it ain't mad at you. It's the whole issue of space-time as humanly perceived, that which Spinoza reaps. Travel back in time to a point you regret what you've done, and because if that were possible, your body would also travel, you'd make the same choice. Over and over. Forever. Guilt's gone for good, and so is the power of the priest, which is why they tried to kill Spinoza. In this sense, not only Nietzsche's idea of eternal recurrence, but also that of amor fati, appear as a sophistication of the entirety of Spinoza's ethics. To love the facts, or to speak in Spinozian, to be filled with joy because of the facts, and to know that you are filled with joy because of them. Not only to accept the inexorable inevitability of the conjugation of body moves body and mind moves mind, and that there's literally nothing in between, but knowingly get from this joy, to increase what Spinoza would call power of acting, and Nietzsche would, in a sense, modernize by calling it will to power, or so. Maybe, had Spinoza been born some 150 years later than he did, he would have called God nothing. Maybe. The point is that Nietzsche's Spinozism is a consequence of his slight contact with what came to be known as thermodynamics. He knew of entropy. He was able to strip Spinozism of its almost scholastic scholastical lexicon and lay it down in the totally non-geometrical terms of the artsy bourgeois mentality he was living under, precisely because this was all going on during what would be called the dawn of science and the modern world, the Kantian world, so to speak. Oh, but entropy is the most easily comprehensible idea, someone might say. Coffee gets cold, beer gets hot, and it's much easier to let a cup fall and break than to fix it up together. It's literally what everyone sees all the time. And surely not only Spinoza but other thinkers that lived prior to the advent of what came to be known as thermodynamics saw this and thought of this. Sure, maybe. But this was overall explained in completely different terms. Words make things happen, and it is impossible to really know something without a word. I'm not saying that gravity didn't really exist before Newton, but maybe someone's gonna say it. The point is that with thermodynamics, we have then a bunch of new words for this. And I'm not saying that thermodynamics is just a metaphysical lexicon update, but maybe I will. It is, after all, one of the favorite terms used by poorly worded atheists when they want to talk about God. Energy. Oh no, I don't believe in God. I believe there's some energy. Sure, pal. Good luck with your atheism. There's a question my father asked me when I told him my studies were going through a field I had been calling philosophy of energy. To be sincere, my first name was thermodynamical philosophy. However, I came to an understanding that philosophy of energy would better express its relation to the contemporary energetic transition debate and the energy problem overall. So I told my father, and he asked me that which I consider still to be the paradigmatic question of the philosophy of energy. But energy like electric energy or like spiritual energy? This is the million-dollar question, and the best answer, of course, would say that it's both. The issue is how to get there. And there's a whole battalion detour that could happen now. A postmodern battalion Spinozism that says that all there is energy flux based on surplus and mechanical decision-making on how to proceed about the surplus. Energy goes on forever being eaten by overly sophisticated beings until the line between life and death gets very thin, yet energy keeps being eaten by overly sophisticated things. We call them rocks mostly here. to the point it gets absolutely liquefied in deep ponds which harvest that which is the most sophisticated life forms, which is to the most sophisticated life forms, us, I guess, considered to be one of the greatest gems nature provides us: oil. This could be written, right? The Spinoza-Nietzsche-Bataille connection. This is what Hasan Egaristani is talking about in the Cyclonopedia. Though, like Nietzsche and Bataille, he rarely talks of Spinoza. Then there's of course the Freudian input, the inorganic becoming, which is the death drive. To be born is itself traumatic because there's memory of certain valves of the body becoming inorganic, hard, dead. And life proceeds on this excitation, dissipation, resistance mechanism. Alchemists solve it coagula. The solo catastrophe, which is obvious, and because of that Lyotard tells us we might as well consider it to have already happened, it is the same thing of valve hardening. It has happened an infinite amount of times already for beings like you and me to be born. Had we been born on different times, maybe in the past this would have happened less times, but it would still happen the exact amount of times that it will happen before the solo catastrophe. This is what the Jews mean when they say that the world is 5,784 years old, by the way. They're not dumb or anything. They know that there are dinosaurs and whatnot. They just plainly understand that everything is happening at the same time. And that because of that, depending when you were born, some things are already old and some are yet to take place. Nick Land then goes on to say that the human backbone recapitulates history and that there are certain geotraumatic events that are frozen in our spine in a way that you could understand the in nature relation between the things and the beings by carefully studying how the human backbone, a deeply inorganic oriented device, gets the species from the ground to the back pain and speech enabler configuration of bipedalism and its right angled vocal dissipation scope. This is what puts the sense in his idea that nothing human makes out of the near future. Of course, nothing human comes out of the near future. How could it? It's not like evolution has stopped. It's not like the inorganic becoming has ceased to manage the dissipation of an energy excitation that it's so big it rips the minimal being, the cell. And because of that, forces part of it to absolute torpor. In a way, it cannibalizes part of it. In another Spino Battalion movement. And I said, by the way, that someone could say that thoughts are stored in specific parts of your body. There it is. This echoes too, of course, Deleuze and Guattari's notion in the Anti-Oedipus that for all the people on the earth, but mainly for the ones that have been colonized or either entered a nomadization process, there's some sort of vague and mostly unconscious historical bodily memory, which the struggle, different from the immediate appearance of the class struggle, can only appear if mediated. It can only appear if mediated in the sense that folk memory is mostly made to be erased, for written history knows almost nothing of it, and it takes real effort to get to know your mostly oral families and your people's history, and understand how really you came to be where you are. The never-ending inorganic becoming is, like Mark Fisher has pointed out in his Spinoza Neuropunk text, why some of the most popular xenobeings of pop culture are like the alien and the predator, beings who can willingly and bizarrely to our eyes drop parts of their bodies when they don't need them anymore. It's an overall alien classic, really. The being covered up by biomechanical armor that is so developed you don't even know anymore what is being and what is thing. The ultimate consequence of the death drive in our faces. It is scary, of course. We do not want to know that we are already dead, but such is our situation. All of these ideas, the exegetic read of Ray Brassier's text, its Spinozist read, Its battalion accumulation and the following accelerationist inputs from Land and Fisher and Nagaristani would all in themselves justify presentations of their own. I want to, however, to make a movement as elegant as that which I consider Brassier's to still, in the end, talk yet about philosophy. So fun and games when talking about the deep concerns of human life. But what about philosophy? Can we talk about it? Can we make it all still be, in the end, about philosophy? Brassier ends his texts on nothingness and extinction immensely, saying that the will to know, which drives philosophy, is nothing but the organ of extinction. I want to question that. Having introduced my accelerationist Spino battalion read of the whole thing, I want to question the idea that the will to know renders philosophy, which is the organ of extinction, by asking then what's out of it. And I'll do it by studying a simple premise from French novelist Michel Houellebecq, that there's no longer today anything philosophy can say better than literature. If that's true, how does the will to know function in such a model? If that's true, is it in literature that we could posit an opposite organ of creation? It's what I'm going to argue for, understanding that this would be entailed by some sort of will to unknow, whatever that is. If I'm right, that is, if my opposites are good, both Brassier and I will be correct. Well, so, the exact quote from Michel Houellebecq that I'm referencing was said by him in the Fronteiras do Pensamento, Frontiers of Thought conference held in Porto Alegre, Brazil, in November the 7th of 2016. And to be precise, it goes like this. Quote, even in the analysis of the facts of society and topicality, philosophers can be less interesting than novelists. End quote. This is the whole conclusion of Houellebecq's point in that speech, which starts by pointing out the fun in Camus and Sartre considering themselves philosophers. For, says Houellebecq, the only thing that will be saved from Camus are the first two lines from The Stranger, and from Sartre, absolutely nothing will be saved except a vague mixture of dread and repulsion over the fact that a being like him could have existed. He goes on to say that the following generation of French theorists, that of Deleuze, Derrida, Lacan, and Foucault, replaced the novelist philosopher schemata for an even worse mechanism, the recurrence to the mysterious prodigies of poetry. It must be recognized that, obviously, he's talking mainly about French philosophy, and even makes a point of underlining how he believes that across the ocean over England, the writing professionals have accepted to be sharp observers and commenters of society and modern life without, he says, trying to mask the lack of ideas, as would the French do, according to Houellebecq. He then gets to the following generation, his, and he points to how the brightest minds of this age, which are considered professional thinkers, have almost completely moved over to literature, which would nowadays be the true source of interesting ideas. He posits himself in this group, of course. It's easy to dismiss Houellebecq as an arrogant conservative. It's so easy that it has been done many times. It's his public image, one he actually seems very comfortable with. But the point is not if his take on French philosophy is correct. In a sense, the point is not even if his idea that nowadays philosophers can be less interesting than novelists is correct. Yes, this is what we're out to investigate, but we're not obliged by his quote. And this is the case because we have the concreteness of the Houellebecq situation itself. We have the author himself. Had been born 100 years, or even 50 years before he did, he would most certainly be a philosopher. Or better yet, he would most certainly call himself a philosopher. For one of the points here is that he is obviously a philosopher, but he does not call himself that. Why? what is the problem being a philosopher. And it's not just that his novels are deeply philosophical, no. He has even written proper philosophy, so to speak. He has a book on Schopenhauer, he has a book on Lovecraft, he has a book on modern French politics. But most importantly, he has a metaphysical system. And I'm not saying that metaphysics is mostly and I'm not saying that to be a philosopher is to have a metaphysical system. And I know that metaphysics is mostly a kind of discourse, a specific type of register. A type of register that is nowhere to be found in Houellebecq's work. Yet, all of his novels are the development, or maybe even the recurrence, of one single metaphysical idea, which is the title of his first novel, The Extinction of the Domain of the Struggle, or the Fight. Published in 1994 and translated to the English language by the innocuous title of Whatever. To put it simply, the struggle is the fight for space-time, and to consider the extension of its domain is to investigate how far is the struggle going and how it is operating in overly seemingly incomprehensible ways. Houellebecq considers the struggle for time as the fight for money, and the struggle for space as the fight for sex. His descriptions of the world that is and his predictions for the world to come are driven by what seems at first hand a nihilistic view of life. For not only there would be absolutely nothing that's going to be left out of the extension of the domain of the struggle, but also because the underlying teleology of his work is one that points to nothing but extinction. Because of that, to say that he's considered a nihilistic conservative is barely to scratch the surface of his public persona, for he's often considered misogynistic, misanthrope, and Islamophobic. It is my understanding, though, that these interpretations have the depthness of a teacup, especially when confronted with the actual point of Houellebecq, what he really means by extinction, and what that may have to do with not being a philosopher. It is in that sense now that, in order to conclude, I would like to take a brief look into three of Houellebecq's novels which deal more objectively with the truth of extinction. Elementary Particles from 1998, The Possibility of an Island from 2005, and his latest book, Annihilate, from 2022. Okay, so the first one, Elementary Particle, tells the story of two brothers. One of them is a mentally insane individual who is what we would call nowadays an involuntary celibate, an incel, and the other brother is a geneticist who makes the greatest discovery in the history of mankind. I quote here from the book, quote, his first work, The Topology of Meiosis, published in 2002, had a considerable impact. It established for the first time, on the basis of irrefutable thermodynamic arguments, that the chromosomal separation at the moment of meiosis, which creates haploid gametes, is in itself a source of structural instability. In other words, all species dependent on sexual reproduction are by definition mortal. End quote. The character here is called Michel Dzerzhinsky. Then Dzerzhinsky's second work, Three Conjectures on Topology in Hilbert Spaces, was also bombastic, being compared to Cantor's work to establish a typology of the infinite, which created set theory, or the work of Gottlob Frege, which redefined the basis of logic. I'm summing it up the best I can, but to put it one line, what the consequence of the work of Michel Dzerzhinsky, and I quote again from the book, is, quote, any genetic code, however complex, could be noted in a standard, structurally stable form, isolated from disturbances or mutations. This meant that every cell contained within it the possibility of being infinitely copied. Every animal species, however highly evolved, could be transformed into a similar species reproduced by cloning and immortal. This entails the development of what is considered to be a new species. End quote, by the way. This entails the development of what is considered to be a new species, New Humans. The worldwide broadcast of the creation of the first intelligent species made by man on his own image was accompanied by a speech that underlined how humanity should be honored. Um, the worldwide broadcast of the creation of the first intelligent species made by man on his own image was accompanied by a speech that underlined how humanity should be honored as the first species in the universe to develop the conditions for its own replacement. As the 21st century goes on, so goes on the replacement of the old species, and Houellebecq notes how, quote, contrary to the doomsayers, this extinction is taking place peaceably, despite occasional acts of violence which also continue to decline. It has been surprising to note the meekness, resignation, and perhaps even secret relief with which humans have consented to their own passing. End quote. So, this is the first one. On the second one, the possibility of an island, it is also the possibility of perfect reproduction and cloning, that which entails the ontological turn. In that book, however, humanity makes use of this technology to reach a certain kind of immortality. It's a more dystopian, utopian kind of novel, for the new species, here actually called indeed neo-humans, are now living in separately ways in particular high-tech tents provided by what appears to be the amalgam of a state and a company enterprise. It tells the love story between Daniel and Marie across the centuries. For whenever one of them dies, they're immediately replaced by a clone of themselves whose sole job in the world is to write every day in a diary and to read the diaries of their past versions so they know who they are. In this world, because reproduction has been stripped away from sex, apparently there's no real need for anyone to actually try to meet and have sex. As a matter of fact, there's apparently no real need for anyone to do anything other than to read and write their own memories and communicate with colleagues through some sort of internet. The configuration of economy and politics is not made very clear, but everything gets to everyone's door by mail. Even your dog, if it dies, an exact copy of it as a puppy will arrive through the mail the next morning. The geist of the book is that even though Daniel 17 and Daniel 25 are all exact clones of Daniel 1, just as Marie 14 and Marie 23 are all clones of Marie 1, it's not guaranteed that, even though it's all the same, the genes and the history, it's not guaranteed that they will always love each other. I'm not going to spoil the end of the book, for it's very beautiful, and actually the point I want to make is the premise itself. Once again, humanity dies on purpose, willingly and peacefully, in order to bring about the next thing. Extinction is not bad. This is our game, our end game, and has always been apparently. It's the whole point of humanity, what everything is doing, what science is doing, what history is doing, what philosophy is doing, to find a way to die. As Nick Land said, nothing human comes out of the near future. The third and final Michel Houellebecq novel I want to comment on is his latest, Annihilate. The title, of course, is very suggestive. However, there's a very interesting twist Houellebecq operates here. The political world is taken up by storm by the proliferation of deepfakes. There's a video online of the Prime Minister of France being beheaded. He is, however, still alive. And the French government gathers the top companies working in CGI in the world, and none of them are able to explain how the video was made. Later on, videos of cargo ships being attacked also begin to surface. However, the Promethean science fiction present in elementary particles and the possibility of an island is entirely dropped off to tell the story of an old man with cancer who falls back in love with his wife. While reading, you're filled with curiosity over what's going on in the world, but this is all sidelined to the story of this old couple. Critics were surprised by that book Is Houellebecq not evil anymore? Why there seems to be a positivity in his latest novel? My point here is that this was always the case for Houellebecq. He was always a romantic. Sure, he was always fond of deeply realistic and even neo-naturalistic prose, but his nihilism was always a positive one. Nothingness is not a problem, for it is the condition of anything that is. To consider the fact that there is death in the middle of the way a problem is to ignore that, actually, we are already dead. Why, however, has Houellebecq, in what he said is his final novel ever, opted to not delve into the conditions for extinction? And why is yet the book called Annihilate? Well, the hero is already in the condition for extinction, one might say. He has cancer. Sure, but I believe there is more to it, which brings us back finally to the questions that guided the text. How does the will to know function in this reality where philosophers can't say anything that is more interesting than anything novelists can say? Well, I can't but posit the power Houellebecq is talking about when he talks about literature in comparison to philosophy as some sort of will to unknow. And I believe his novel Annihilate is him coming to terms with it, understanding what he, himself, wanted to say all those years. This is why the book is so much more mystical than metaphysical, and why everything, even though this is by far Houellebecq's biggest novel, is left in the dark, even the ending. If the will to know which drives philosophy can be rendered the organ of extinction, it is only the will to unknow that can only be expressed by literature, that which represents truly the organon of creation. Creation is not about reproduction, and reproduction is not about sex. Creation is about art, and art is always 100% of the time about love. The only thing really that can be created. Or, as Houellebecq elegantly puts, there exists in the midst of time the possibility of an island.